Hey, welcome back to Financial Sense. Today, we're going to dive deeper into the water issue here in the state of Arizona. You are listening to Financial Sense, Arizona's financial podcast that gives you insights that you could only get from having a friend in the business. Recorded and brought to you by National Bank of Arizona, the only bank you need. Hey, welcome back to Financial Sense. Today, we're going to take a little deeper dive into water and how the agricultural industry is dealing with this important issue. Today, we have two of our agribusiness bankers. We have Matt Eyrich and Carrie Morales. Matt has been working in the banking and specifically in agriculture for over 35 years. Carrie has also been working in the industry for over 20 years. I think an extremely hot and relevant topic right now is the climate and the sustainability really of the agricultural industry, not just here in Arizona, but really broader, the West, Midwest. I mean, everything you read, it's all about how sustainable is this industry. And, you know, you can't start that conversation without starting with water. In talking about water, I think we need to provide kind of an overview of how water works in the state of Arizona. Who would like to jump into that topic?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is kind of set a parameter for when we talk about water. What we're hearing in the media right now really is all around CAP water, or water from the river.
Colorado
River. And that's important, and we need to pay attention to it. However, there's other sources of water in the state of Arizona. You've got groundwater, and we also have our own river systems and stuff that we've got dams and utilize that water too, whether it's coming down out of the White Mountains into the Salt River Basin or San Carlos District coming up from the Gila River. All of these are being affected by climate. So that's paramount. But I think when you talk about ag specifically in the current discussion, we need to realize that when the leaders 80 years ago or more started talking about water, and they started negotiating the Colorado River water and allocations, ag was a big part of that and has stayed a big part of that. But ag was also the ability to get the allocation, and over time, that water allocation from the river was going to go to the municipalities. So we were going to see it decline or go away completely for agricultural use. That target date was 2030. We're 8 years difference. We used the best information we had 80 years ago to determine what kind of usage was going to come out of the river. We're in a 22-year drought. They hadn't seen this kind of stuff. So, when you figure 8 years, we're not too far off. Right. So ag has been planning for this for a long time. Okay. And when we talk about water and the word sustainability and all this other stuff, we need to kind of tie all that together, because the folks, the growers in Arizona have studied water for years, have got more and more efficient, are probably the most highly efficient water users as far as agriculture goes that you're going to see maybe even in the world. And so it's not something that's just come about for the agriculturalists. They know what's going on.
Interesting. Carrie?
Well, and like Matt was saying, to kind of add to that, our farmers use things like drip irrigation. They use the sprinklers. They have the leveling for the flood irrigation on it. And if you look at the water use our farmers have today compared to where it was in 1957, it's the same level. They're using the same amount of water that they used at that point in time. Stat. So there's improved efficiencies.
With more production.
Right. And on less acres, that they're doing more with less on it. And like Matt said, as part of the Central Arizona Project, which is the CAP, there was the original forethought to say, how are we going to allocate this? What are we going to use for our priority? And knowing that there was an end date. The more important aspect is the groundwater of it. We knew that the CAP was going to go away, but now how do we ensure that we maintain the aquifers at the correct levels and that we have the flow of water to get to the farmers? That's what they're concerned about, is do we have enough support to utilize the groundwater now as 100% versus historically only being 50% of their water?
Right. That's really the big challenge. Mm-hmm. Since we're talking about innovation, we hear a lot about desalination concept. Either of you have thoughts on that?
Great idea. Pretty expensive still. To me, that kind of falls in the same thing as building a pipeline from the Mississippi River. Yeah. I mean, what people need to understand with water is that there's a finite resource of water on the world,
period,
let alone Arizona. So if we take water from someplace else and move it into another environment, there's going to be effect there. Right. And so, we live in a desert. We ought to learn to live within our resources. And I think, as we discuss some more things here, when we get into sustainability, we can talk about how that factors into the sustainability discussion.
Sure. So I believe that there's 7 states and Mexico part of the Colorado River Compact, and everyone knows can't open up the Arizona Republic or turn on without seeing that we're going to be in Tier 2A, I believe, starting 2023, which for us, as I understand it, it says that we're going to have about a 21% cut in our CAP allocation, our Colorado
Central Arizona Project.
Yeah, thanks. The Central Arizona Project. I knew I almost had it. The Central Arizona Project, 21% cut. But there's no doubt that we're part of a large ecosystem. I do want to get your perspective on this. I know that, for instance, and it's a hot topic, and I think we'd really miss an opportunity here. But I believe that the only 2 in the Tier 2A, the only 2 states are Arizona and Nevada taking cuts, whereas the 800-pound gorilla in the room, California, isn't. Was that part of? Is that just kind of poor negotiating? I'm just curious what the thought is, and maybe what you're hearing from the farmers.
That was all set up based on who had priority in the water. So California's priority is above Arizona and Nevada. What was tried to be accomplished here in June, when the federal reclamation group came back and said, we're going to have to cut another 4 million acre feet of water out of the Colorado River. How are we going to do that? The hope was that we would sit down and come to conclusion, and everybody would take a little bit of that. California decided basically not to participate in those discussions. So because of the way that the thing had been set up for years, Arizona and Nevada, got their allocations cut. But that was per the original agreements and the priority interest by state.
So from your perspective, at what point do those other states kind of get brought to the table?
It's happening now.
Is it?
Because with this Tier 2 shortage on it, the other states have to come to the table. They have to have these agreements to go through what are the adjustments that need to be made. Because it gets to the point where you have to reduce the outflow from Lake Mead, or it's going to become a situation where the electrical generation and other aspects, when it gets to the dead pool levels, that it comes into play. And that's not only detrimental to us from the water delivery, but the cost of electric.
Right.
Again, I mean, and the electricity that goes through the Western electric
grid
out of the dams usually goes to rural Arizona.
Right.
So the impact again is going to be mainly on rural Arizona in terms of electricity and stuff. The other term that you hear here recently is cratering the system or shutting down the system, and that's back to what Kerry was saying. That's a matter of, it doesn't matter who's got priority. If there's not enough water in the river, there's not enough water in the river.
Right.
And a new wrinkle in some ways to the situation we're in. But again, this is not a static even deal. Every day brings new nuances to the water deal in terms of what kind of weather we're getting, what kind of water we're getting, and all that kind of stuff. So we have to stay pretty fleet of foot to keep up with it.
Well, let's kind of boil it down to Arizona, because from that you get now the users in Arizona, and this push and pull and out debates really between rural and metro, specific to housing, the urban sprawl, also known as. If you ask somebody in Phoenix, it's all the water's going to ag. And if you ask somebody in rural Arizona, it's like we need that to grow. And so let's talk about kind of houses. And I know we're going to broach also outside of water, right? Because as part of the metropolitan areas continue to grow, a lot of that land, it has historically been used for ag.
Right.
So let's just kind of dive into that, and you can come at it from water, you can come at it from.
So, let's come at that from sustainability.
Okay.
On a 50,000 foot level. Natural resources are natural resources. The ag industry uses natural resources, whether it's the ground, the weather, water, to produce food and fiber for the country, basically.
Right.
We've taken an awful lot of ground out for growth. I think the really big question we have to answer in the state is what is our sustainability for the resources we have, and where do we want to use that water? Do we want to use it to have humongous metropolitan areas, or do we want to use it to have a diversified state with viable and strong rural communities as well, and an ag presence? And how do we divvy that up? That's
right.
The real question that we've got to come to right now. At this point, as we noted before, ag has always known that it was going to quit getting the cap water, and there's groundwater that can be utilized for that. There's some infrastructure needs that it needs, as Carrie brought up, to make that more efficient. But here pretty soon, municipalities are going to have to start coming to the table in terms of how they're going to manage their water. And so that's kind of the next step in the process.
Right.
But the bigger question to me is we got to start thinking about what our future is in Arizona and how we want to look as a state.
I'd agree. And like Matt was saying, it's a natural resource. You only have a finite amount of water. You only have a finite amount of ground.
Right.
You can't just go
Right.
make more ground
Right.
and decide to farm on it. And it's, as a state, determining where are we going? What do we want it to be for our children? And what's the future going to hold in it? And like Matt said, it's with those finite resources, you have to look and say, all right, we know the farmers are doing all they can to be more efficient, but also have an economic driver, have that diversification for sustainability. But what are we doing in the cities to do it? Are
Right.
we planting more grass, using the water? Are we feeding that grass?
Right.
Or are we just having turf out there?
Right.
And it's having those tough decisions that those of us at the table here can't do it. It's what everybody else and the populace and what we vote for to
Yeah.
make those determinations.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing you got to look at in this deal is Arizona ag uses 70% of the water. That's the number that gets bannered around, and almost as if we're wasting that. But let's look at what that means. If you take an acre of cotton at 2 bales to the acre, that acre of cotton produces 500 pairs of jeans. If you look at Yuma produces over 500 million head of lettuce in a year. That's enough to feed for every man, woman, and child in the United States,
Wow.
and in Canada, Mexico, and the UK to have a head of lettuce every winter. And that's not counting the broccoli and the celery and all the other stuff that goes on here. So when you bring that back into play, if you look at municipal water use on a per acre basis, it's way below what ag is. But you're also looking at 4 to 5 houses on
Right.
on an acre versus what that acre can produce back for all of humanity, let alone the viability that it produces for rural Arizona. And I think that's something we miss sometimes too. I mean, do we want to just be a big central,
Right.
municipality in the middle of the state, or do we want a strong state across from north to south and east to west?
Yeah. I mean, I think you said earlier that the ag industry provides, I think, about 150,000 jobs.
Yep.
Throughout the state. I mean, that is a major job provider in this economy. And to have a big portion of that go away, to your point, that means, there's not going to be jobs out in rural Arizona. They're going to be coming into Phoenix Metro, Tucson Metro. And then, of course, you continue to have those issues where you already have a shortage of housing in those two markets.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, the domino effect, just from an economic standpoint, is I think material.
Right.
Right.
So we've talked about sustainability, but I really want to hear what you hear from the farmers, the producers, the growers. I mean, how do what's their take on this, especially the water part of the sustainability? I mean, what are they saying?
They want more support when it comes to the cost to have more efficiencies. The barriers to doing more efficient water, like the drip irrigation or to have the sprinklers on it. It's truly the cost aspect of it. And a lot of our farmers own ground, but they also rent it.
Right.
And it's the input and the cost to put in that drip on rented ground. The farmers can't absorb that and also be able to live and have a profit at all. So that's what they're looking for, is more support, more understanding, and not just support from a financial aspect, but from a community in it, to realize that they do bring value to the state.
Ag in general has been pretty quiet historically in terms of kind of presenting itself to the public. Over the last 50 years, ag's footprint has been reduced by 40%, but we are producing about 20% more product than we did then. So we've reduced the footprint, but we've got more efficient at it. We've got more efficient at it from technology standpoint, just science in general. And so sustainability is integral, but we just don't, as agriculturalists, talk about that enough. And we're there. We're leading the way. We've talked to you about the fact that Arizona farmers have been water conscious for 40 years.
Right.
This is not new to them.
Right.
And even though we're still using the bulk of the water, it's used much more efficiently than it was 30 or 40 years ago. It'll be used more efficiently 20 or 30 years from now as well. I can guarantee you that. We've done an awful lot. And I don't think people understand enough that ag has been a part of this from the beginning and stays that way.
Yeah, really good perspective. I want to just kind of close our discussion here on the water portion of sustainability. Let's ask the question that a lot of people in the state ask. If and when Arizona may run out of water?
Well, it won't be tomorrow, but other than that, I don't have a crystal ball. And again, we gotta put it in perspective. We're talking about surface water or Colorado River water or Salt River water, and we're talking about groundwater. From the latest information that we've got in terms of groundwater, depending on what basin you're in, and ag specifically, it's believed that we've got at least 15 or 20 years, and that could be a moving target. It could be more, it could be less.
Right.
We need more studies, a little more studies as we start utilizing the groundwater that hasn't been used in a number of years because there's been cap available. But, when's the drought going to end? I can't tell you when that's going to happen. So there's no good answer for that. And if somebody's putting one out there, it's speculation at best.
Carrie?
And like Matt said, the important part is to think that there's more than just one source of water. We have the Colorado River water. We have the in-state river water, which is the SRP stuff.
Right.
And then you have the groundwater.
Right.
Keep in mind that in the western part of the metro area, there's the Harquahala Valley.
Right.
Underneath that has a huge aquifer that's projected to be 3 times Lake Mead's side of that aquifer. Then if you look at some of the other aquifers for the groundwater, remember, we've been banking, as they call it, the water from the CAP. So instead of it being rainwater to replenish that aquifer, we've been using the CAP water to build those aquifers up, which takes, I would guess, about an average of 20 years from when it comes into the top to filter all the way through to get into the aquifer. And we've been doing this since the 60s with the CAP. We had the canal finished in 71. So we've rebuilt the aquifers from when we depleted them before. And now there's also what they call the active management areas. So the ability to drill more wells, to dig more of that water out is limited because of the Arizona Department of Water Resources and those AMAs too. So water, I don't think we're running out tomorrow. We will have a reduction in one source of our water supply, which isn't derived from rainwater. It's derived from the snowpack that happens up in Colorado to start with. So keeping in mind that it gets hotter here, we have more weather here, and we're utilizing it here, but it's not things that we're doing here that impact Colorado River. But we have 3 sources to get it.
So that's, a lot of folks see that we've had a great monsoon season here in Arizona, which is, in different parts of the state. So that's the rainwater you're talking about. That ultimately makes it down into the aquifer. So
those will go down into the aquifer. That's your in-state water supply too. So when you're looking at that rainwater and what do we have going on with SRP and what are their, is Horseshoe Dam, is that filled up? What's going on there? That's that local in-state water that's coming. And that's the water flow.
Surface water.
Right. Yeah. And more important really though for that is your winter snowpacks than your runoff from monsoons. We've had a great monsoon season. It's helped. That's going to be short-lived. none of this discussion that we're having right here is rational now for kicking the can down the road on how we handle water. And I want to make sure people understand that. We're not sloughing it off saying, hey, we got all kinds of water, don't worry about it. We live in a desert. Sometimes, maybe often, at least historically, we've forgotten that, and we need to address that. But water's not, the tap's not going to run dry tomorrow unless something's wrong with your setup.
What does running out of water mean, right? So that's like, well, what does that mean? I mean, what are some of the things you hear or could share with the viewers?
As far as the farmers we talk to, we don't talk about running out of water.
Right.
It's just a matter of switching sources and staying efficient. You know, I guess the ultimate deal of running out of water is 1,000 years from now, somebody uncovers the Phoenix metropolitan area similar to the way we've uncovered the whole canals in area here.
And I'd say running out of water would be no more housing permits because there's no longer a 100-year water supply.
Right.
Or, which kind of gets around the housing permits, no more apartments being built to it. You turn on the faucet and you only have X amount of water allocated per household.
Right.
Things like that would be, when I hear people say, are you going to run out of water? That's my interpretation of running out of water.
Right.
But like Matt said, that's not the discussion we have with the farmers. It's a matter of where are you getting your water from the conversation.
But I don't think we have to come to that, but we've got to be smart and we got to pay attention to what we're doing. Okay. And I think it circles back to some discussion we had earlier and defining what the sustainability of Arizona is. What's the carrying capacity of Arizona? How much water do we have with the best information we got available, and what kind of lifestyle do we want to have in the state and provide for people, whether that's somebody sitting in the middle of Phoenix or somebody sitting in Pinal County, Bowie, Arizona, Wilcox, Arizona, Yuma, Arizona, wherever the case may be. But what is that we want to have for the state of Arizona?
Right. Well, Matt and Carrie, I want to thank you for your time, but I want to thank you all for joining us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and watch us on YouTube.